Hello, I hope that you are doing well and I'm sending love. I thought I would accomplish something within this hour and read another chapter from The Hidden Life of Trees by Peter Wohlleben, and we are at chapter 25. I'm not such a fan of the title of this chapter, but hopefully something good can come from it. Okay, the sick tree. Statistically speaking, most species of trees can live to a ripe old age. In the burial area of the forest I manage, tree buyers always ask how long their tree might live. Mostly they choose beeches or oaks, and as far as we know, these trees usually live to be between 400 and 500 years old. But what is a statistic worth when you apply it to an individual tree? Just as much as it is worth when you apply it to an individual person. Nothing. The anticipated trajectory of a tree's life can change at any time for any number of reasons. Its health depends on the stability of the forest ecosystem. It's better if temperature, moisture, and light conditions don't change abruptly, because trees react extremely slowly. But even when all the external conditions are optimal, insects, fungi, bacteria, and viruses are always lurking, waiting for the chance to strike. That usually happens only when a tree gets out of balance. Under normal circumstances, a tree carefully apportions its energy. The largest portion is used for daily living. The tree has to breathe, digest its food, supply its fungal allies with sugar, and grow a bit every day. The tree has to keep hidden reserves of energy on hand to fight off pests. These secret reserves can be activated at any time, and depending on the tree species, they contain a selection of defensive compounds produced by the tree. These so-called, here's a pronunciation again, phytoncides, I probably said that wrong, have antibiotic properties, and there has been some impressive research done on them. A biologist from Leningrad, Boris Tokin, described them like this back in 1956. If you add a pinch of crushed spruce or pine needles to a drop of water that contains protozoa, in less than a second the protozoa are dead. In the same paper, Tokin writes that the air in young pine forest is almost germ-free, thanks to the phytoncides released by the needles. In essence, then, the trees disinfect their surroundings, but that isn't all. Walnuts have compounds in their leaves that deal so effectively with insects that garden lovers are often advised to put a bench under a canopy of walnuts if they want a comfortable place to relax in the garden, because this is where they will have the least chance of being bitten by mosquitoes. The phytoncides in conifers are particularly pungent, and they are the origin of that heady forest scent that is especially intense on a hot summer day. If the carefully calibrated balance of energy for growth and defense gets thrown out of alignment, then a tree might get sick. This can happen, for example, when a neighboring tree dies. Suddenly the crown gets more light, and now what the tree wants more than anything is more photosynthesis. Sure. That makes sense because a chance like this comes along only about once every 100 years. The tree, finding itself suddenly bathed in sunlight, forgets about everything else and focuses exclusively on growing branches. It has no option really, because its surrounding cohort is doing the same thing, which means that the gap in the canopy will close again in 20 years, which, if you are a tree, means you don't have much time. Suddenly, growth speeds up, and instead of adding a few fractions of inch a year, the tree is adding about 20 inches. This takes energy, which is then not available for fending off illnesses and pests. If the tree is lucky, all goes well, and once the canopy closes again, the tree will have increased the size of its crown. Then it will take a break and settle back into apportioning its energy in a way that suits its lifestyle. But woe betide the tree if something goes wrong during this growth spurt. A fungus might attack the stub left by a fallen branch and, unnoticed, make its way along the dead wood and into the trunk. Or a bark beetle might take an exploratory bite out of a tree busy reaching for the light and discover there is no defensive response. Then the game is up. The trunk, which appears to be in the very best of health, finds itself increasingly under attack because it doesn't have the energy to mobilize a defense. Sure, that is resonant. Anyway, the first reactions to the attack soon show up in the tree tops. In deciduous trees, the vital topmost growth suddenly dies, leaving thick branch stubs with no side branches sticking up into the sky. The initial reaction of conifers is that their needles don't last as long. Sick pines, for instance, retain not 3, but maybe 1 or 2 generations of needles on their branches, which makes their crowns noticeably more open. In spruce, you also get what is known in Germany as the Lametta effect, where the twigs hang limply from the branches. Lametta is another name for the tinsel that is draped over the branches of Christmas trees. A short time later, big flakes of bark break off the trunk. Things deteriorate quite quickly from this point. Like a deflating hot air balloon, the crown implodes and sinks as it dies, and winter storms break off the dead branches. You can see this even more clearly with spruce, because the desiccated tips of the dying trees contrast clearly with the living green of the lower branches. Every year, a tree adds a growth ring to the wood in its trunk, because it is, you could say, damned to grow whether it wants to or not. In the growing season, the cambium, that narrow layer of clear cells between the bark and the wood, grows new woody cells on the inside and new bark cells on the outside. If a tree cannot increase its girth, it dies. At least that is what we thought for a long time. Then researchers noticed pines in Switzerland that looked outwardly healthy and were covered in green needles. On closer inspection, either by cutting the trees down or taking core samples, researchers discovered that a few of them hadn't created a single new growth ring for more than 30 years. Dead pines covered in green needles? The tree had been attacked by an aggressive fungus called Anosis root rot, and the cambium had died. But the roots were still pumping water up to the crown through the long, narrow transport vessels in the trunk, providing the needles with life-giving moisture. And the roots themselves, when the cambium is dead, the bark is too, which means the tree can no longer pump sugar solutions from its needles back down to its roots. Therefore, healthy neighboring pines must have been helping their dying comrades by supplying their roots with food. As I've described in chapter 1, friendships. Like that. Apart from, that's actually sure. Sounds like a better friendship than a lot of ones I hear about. We can take lessons from this book for many areas of life. Anyway, apart from diseases, a lot of trees suffer injuries over the course of their lives. There are many different ways this can happen. A neighboring tree might fall. In a dense forest, a falling tree cannot avoid hitting a few surrounding comrades. If this happens in winter, when the tree's relatively dry bark fits tightly around their wood, not much happens. Most often, only a few branches break, leaving no visible signs of damage after just a few years. Injuries to the trunk are more serious, and these usually happen during the summer months. This is when the cambium is full of water, crystal clear and slippery. At this time, it doesn't take much pressure to loosen the outer layer of the tree, and the branches from a falling neighbor scraping can rip yard-long wounds in the tree's trunk. Ouch! The damp wound is an ideal landing site for fungal spores, which arrive just minutes later. They grow fungal threads that immediately begin making a meal out of the wood and the tree's food supplies, but they don't make much progress. There's simply too much water in the wood. Although fungi like it moist, soaking wet conditions spell death for them. At first, their victory march into the interior of the trunk is slowed by the wet outer wood where sap is flowing. However, the sap wood is now exposed to the air and its outer layers can dry out. A slow motion struggle begins. The fungus advances as the sap wood loses its moisture, while the tree tries to close up the wound. To do this, the tissues around the injury really get going and start growing together as fast as they can. They can cover up to 1/3 of an inch of injured wood per year. To avoid complications in the future, the tree must get the area sealed once again within 5 years tops. Once new bark has closed the old wound, the tree can saturate the damaged sapwood from the inside and kill the fungus. However, if the fungus has made it from the sapwood into the heartwood, the older wood beneath the sapwood that no longer transports water or stores energy in reserves, then it's too late. The decommissioned wood is drier and therefore ideal for the attacker, and the tree can't mount any defenses here. Yo, this is making me think of guard your heart. Guard your heart. Okay. Sorry. The decommissioned wood is drier and therefore ideal for the attacker, and the tree can't mount any defenses here. So the decisive factor in whether the tree has a chance is the size of the wound. Anything much more than an inch is life-threatening. But even if the fungus wins and makes itself at home inside the tree, all is not yet lost. True, the fungus can get stuck into the wood without further hindrance, but it takes time. A whole century can pass before everything has been consumed and turned into mush. Even this won't make the tree the slightest bit less stable, because the fungus cannot expand into the wet outer growth rings of the living sapwood. In extreme cases, the tree gets hollowed out like a stovepipe. That's how it happens, okay? And just like a pipe, the tree remains stable. So we shouldn't feel sorry for a rotten tree, and it doesn't necessarily feel pain either, because the heartwood is no longer active and usually no longer contains any living cells. The outer growth rings, which are still active, transport water up the trunk and therefore are much too wet for fungi. If a tree has successfully walled off, that is to say closed up, an injury to its trunk, then it can usually grow as old as its uninjured companions. But sometimes, especially in cold winters, the old wounds can act up again. Then a crack like a rifle shot echoes through the forest and the trunk splits open along the old injury. This is caused by differences in tension in the frozen wood, because the wood in trees with a history of injury varies greatly in density. So, again, I want to say you learn something new almost every page of this book. Oh my goodness, amen. Thank you, Jesus, because the next chapter is Let There Be Light. How awesome is that? I'm looking forward to that so much. Oh gosh, that's really nice. Anyway, yeah, with that, And let there be light in your heart, in your eyes, in your life, in the lives of people that are around you, in the sun rays that hit you in your house. Just let there be light. And keep hope alive. And yeah. Wishing you well, and I'll see you again soon. Bye.